Okay, a little Fleetwood Mac to get us going. We have a couple more people on the line now, so I think it's best that we get going in order to stick to our half an hour timeline-ish. So I know a couple of you who are with us today have attended a webinar with us previously, but I wanted to welcome everyone to the second World of Work webinar. The World of Work is a concept aimed to create a central meeting place, whether that is in person or virtual or via our website, for people who are looking for information about the workplace or other connections within different workplaces through both online content, and through various events. So the idea for these webinars is that we have three people from very different organizations with different positions and ideas within those organizations who speak about three very different topics. We would love to have feedback on the topics and the presenters, and as always, we encourage you to get in touch directly with our lovely presenters or speakers if you have any follow-up or would like to just keep the chat going. We'll be posting the contact details of all three of our presenters throughout the presentation and then again at the end. If you do have any direct questions that you want to flag to us today, you can type those up in the question box on the right-hand side. If we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we address them after the fact by sending you an email. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our first speaker, Eric. He's an experienced employment and labor lawyer, currently with Cooperwilliams Law, based in Vancouver, BC. And he's going to be speaking to us about an important development in the employment law space. So take it away, Eric.
Thanks, Alexandra, and thanks for that intro and the choice of music. I can say with a fair degree of confidence, I'm going to have that song stuck in my head for the rest of the day, which is not a bad thing necessarily. I'm, of course, here in Vancouver, so I'm going to say good morning, realizing that it may be the afternoon for many of us who are joining. Thank you for joining. Hopefully you did manage to get some sleep and weren't too glued to the television set too late last night. As Alexandra mentioned, I am a labor and employment lawyer. I'm based here in Vancouver. I regularly advise employers on a wide range of employment law matters. And what I'm going to do today is discuss a very recent case by the Supreme Court of Canada called Matthews and Ocean Nutrition. And it's what I've described as essential reading for any employer who offers bonuses or long-term incentive plans. So why don't we jump right into it? If you don't mind going to the next slide, thanks very much. As I mentioned, this is a fairly recent decision. This came out last month, as I've mentioned before, it concerns long-term incentive plans, it concerns annual bonuses, and it concerns entitlements to these payments for those employees who've been let go. So let's start by talking a little bit, of course, about long-term incentive plans. I mean, most employers, or at least many employers, are going to offer some type of compensation beyond an hourly wage or a salary, particularly when you get to levels of employment that are at the managerial level and higher. The purpose of these bonuses can be wide-ranging, but among others, they are designed really to reward service, among others, as well as encourage retention and to keep that type of upper-level management talent within the organization. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's exactly what a long-term incentive plan does. Is it's in some sense a carrot on a stick, which is designed to, like I said, incentivize talent to stay within your organization. Of course, it rewards longer service and encourages retention. From an employer's perspective, generally speaking, many employers are going to want to limit an employee's entitlement to these types of payments, these bonus payments or incentive payments to active employment. That is to say, these are all good programs, good bonuses, but it's a condition of your entitlement to these that at the time that whatever these bonuses are payable or earned, you have to be an actively employed member of our organization at the time. In other words, it's not something that we want to necessarily see entitlement to, long after somebody has left the organization. And again, for among other reasons, it's just to provide some finality to the employer. You don't want to separate the employment relationship and then maybe 1 year later down the road, 2 years down later down the road, have some claims for certain long-term incentive payment plans, particularly if they've been triggered later on. So I'll discuss what I mean by that in a little bit. So in this case, we're concerned with a person named Mr. Matthews. Mr. Matthews was a senior level management employee at Ocean Nutrition, occupied a range of duties, but he was pretty high up in the organization. And he was entitled in his employment contract to various incentive payments, including a bonus that would be triggered in the event that the company was ever sold. So if the company ever changed ownership, that was considered a realization event. And upon that realization event, Mr. Matthews would be entitled to that bonus payment here. And as I mentioned, many employers want to limit that or introduce some degree of finality. And so what I've put here on the right side of the screen is really just a carbon copy of the section from his employment contract. And I've bolded the pertinent part, which really talks about basically limiting his entitlement to only that time when he's an active employee. So if you part ways, whether we terminate you or whether you resign from the company for whatever reason, if you're not actively employed with the organization at the time of this realization event, then you're not going to be entitled to that payment. So sure enough, at some point down the road, several years back, Mr. Matthews resigned amid some fairly contentious circumstances. He claims he was constructively dismissed, but in any event, he did resign from the company. And about 15 months after he resigned from the company was sold. And under his contract, that would have constituted a realization event. And of course, he would have been entitled to a fairly handsome sum of money. And the employer, relying on this employment contract provision, stated that he was not entitled to the bonus because at the time of this sale of the company, of course, he was not actively employed. So this was a dispute that went all the way through three levels of court, ultimately arriving at the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada issuing its decision on the issue of whether Mr. Matthews was entitled to that bonus payment. So next slide, please. So essentially what the Supreme Court of Canada did is it set the groundwork, or it set the ground rules, I should say, for what employees are entitled to, particularly those employees who, like I said, have long-term incentive plan or bonus entitlements that may be triggered after employment. So just to take a step back and as a refresher, we all know that in Canada, when an employee is terminated, or if they are constructively dismissed in this case, they're going to be entitled to reasonable notice. And reasonable notice is a period of time that is dependent on a range of things, including contractual provisions, but also the age of the employee, the length of the service, the type of employment that's held. And those can range anywhere from 1 month up to 24 months, and in some exceptional cases beyond 24 months here. So what the Supreme Court of Canada said here is when we're looking at an employee's entitlement, we don't look to the last day that the employee was working. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look forward and project that reasonable notice period. And in this case, several months. And if that triggering event, if this realization event occurs within the reasonable notice period, that's when the employee is going to be entitled to it, regardless of whether the employee is actually employed or not. So another way of saying it is, but for the termination, if we didn't terminate this person, and instead if we had given them this reasonable notice period where they would have been actively employed and working, would that triggering event have taken place? So just going back to Mr. Matthews, the court did determine he was constructively dismissed, and as a result, he was entitled to 15 months of reasonable notice. And indeed, it was within that 15-month reasonable notice period that the sale of the company took place, and therefore that triggering event took place. And of course, he was therefore entitled to it. So that's what I've illustrated on the graph here. And that's essentially the import of the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, is that when we're looking to entitlements, again, it's not going to be dependent on when the employee is actively employed at the time. Instead, we have to do a bit of a crystal ball gazing exercise to see how much reasonable notice an employee may be entitled to, and what type of events may take place within that reasonable notice period. And again, if these triggering events do take place, the employee is going to be entitled to that. Now, there is a caveat to that, and that's on the next slide. Oh, one more. There we go. the second major column of the Supreme Court of Canada's decision in Matthews is that, well, that's the way the law is. Now, it's if you want to deviate from that, if you want to be able to limit that and really state that if you're not employed at the time, or if you're not actively employed at the time of a triggering event, you're not entitled to it. The Supreme Court of Canada did allow for that to happen, but it made it clear in no uncertain terms that that requires extremely clear, extremely concise, unambiguous contractual language that states so. You know, when I looked at that last provision, or when we showed that last provision, you would have thought that that language was pretty clear. It says, for greater certainty, in no event would you be entitled to, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, even that language, which is fairly, in my view, at least before Matthews, would have been decently clear. The Supreme Court of Canada said that's not clear enough. So what does constitute clear language? Well, we as employment lawyers have some ideas of what that's going to be, but ultimately that language itself just hasn't been tested by the courts yet either. So what's the takeaway from this? Well, twofold. Number one, when you're thinking about employee entitlements for terminations without cause, or any kind of termination where an employee is entitled to reasonable notice, which is to say terminations without cause, you're going to want to think about the reasonable notice period, and you're going to want to think about what events may take place within that. You're going to plan that as part of your liability exposure. Number two, and hand in hand with that, is in limiting that liability exposure, you're going to want to take a look at your contracts and certainly get the assistance of a professional to make sure that if you do want to tie it to active employment, you do so with very, very clear and unambiguous language. So subject to any questions that may arise a bit later on, my next slide contains my contact details. Do feel free to give me a shout if you have any questions about that. But at this stage, I'm going to hand it off.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. It's very interesting to see that development, and I know a lot of employers who might have not had that flagged to them yet will have to do some rejigging of their contracts moving forward. So I think that's an important takeaway for them as well. So next, we're going to move on to our second presenter, Joshua O'Grady. He is coming to us from Toronto, and he is a co-founder of Sprout HR. He's going to speak to building a remote workforce. So Joshua, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Eric, thanks very much for the engaging chat. Always a pleasure. As you all know, it's a beautiful day out, so hopefully this presentation is engaging. If you have any question, guys, you can shoot me an email, send me a question on the chat, or just carrier pigeon, one of the three. So my name is Joshua O'Grady. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sprout.hr. What Sprout is basically, we are a modern tech recruitment consultancy based out of Toronto and Ottawa that helps companies in high growth mode scale by effectively building strategies around how to properly attract talent. Current engagements we're working on is really helping a couple of highly invested startups in the North American landscape to basically find people that are going to really get them to the next series A, B, C, D, or E. So basically today what I wanted to chat about was a topic that seems to be of high importance this year after what we've been through, which is a remote workforce. So the past year, we've seen a great amount of transition in the workforce, and therefore people always ask questions like, how do I do this? What's the transition going to be like? Can I work for a company that's outside of my local geographic zone? The answer is actually yes for everything above. So we'll deep dive into the three different types of remote workforces that we've kind of identified this year, and basically give you some insight if you're looking to hire down the road and or have any questions. Hopefully this answers them. So as you all are aware, what's a remote workforce? Probably 98% of us on this call right now are part of the newly designed remote workforce. Remote workforce means that we're not in an office. It means that we're usually working from somewhere outside of a company headquarters or outside of a work pod, which I believe has been the transition for most people in this world since March. What has long been avoided by Canadian companies was the idea of moving to a remote workforce. And as we all know, I think living in the metropolis, especially outside of Toronto, it's exhausting traveling in and out if you're from Whitby, Burlington, and so forth. The amount of time that you're spending in the office or in the city is actually surpassing the amount of time you're spending at home for personal family matters. For far too long, I think that everyone had the idea that we needed to sit in a lunchroom, potentially share a ham and cheese sandwich, and talk about the next staff meeting that was occurring, when really a lot of us wanted to have more quality time with our significant others, families, or even attending extracurricular events for our kids. So what's happening right now was we got a little bit more of a mix of the overhaul of being able to do a lot of that, and all that time we did want was probably granted this year. 3 types of remote workforces that we've basically consulted on a lot this last year. So the one is called the partial remote workforce. The partial remote workforce is a type of workforce that would be considered as a format in which both employees and their employer are both located in the same geographical zone, i.e. Joshua Grady is located in downtown Toronto and his office is within travel destination every day. Now, what's happened a lot, and what I think will be the newest model going forward, will be the fact that we'll be seeing more of the workforce move into like a 2 to 3 a day in the office situation. This is more to really pursue the idea of still having the interaction and business interaction or engagement with your fellow colleagues and clients, meanwhile having the work-life balance of being at home with significant others as well as having personal time for yourselves. This model is being strategically created by a lot of organizations currently for when the dust settles in COVID and we do return to the office, or some companies do down the road. The second type of workforce that we're seeing be developed right now is called the fully remote domestic workforce. Now, a fully remote domestic workforce is where people within the same kind of country zone area can work. So we'll see teams being constructed in software engineering where you have a software development manager located in Toronto, Ontario, and the engineering team spread across the country in places like Edmonton, Halifax, upwards of Vancouver. But it's usually where you can keep your operations all within a national span, but also have your team fully remote across the country. This is becoming more and more prominent as we're seeing our market, specifically in technology, very saturated with the job market exploding again in engineering. We're seeing way more roles available than there are talent to fill them, which is giving us more options now to work with hiring across the country and not just within your local geographic zone. So very strong model going forward. And obviously it helps out because every geographical zone has different budgetary restraints as well for hiring. If we look at the Vancouver market and Toronto, very similar, whereas Ottawa and Halifax, you might find the same talent for a cheaper price. So creating that strategy can be quite effective if you have a certain budget restraint for your team build. The third type of remote workforce that we are now seeing, which is very fascinating, is the international fully remote workforce. So this is where we're seeing a lot of teams and cultures and nationalities conglomerate to build one company or one team or one organization. For a long time, we've seen the Canadian landscape be a little bit more worrisome of this idea, whereas in specific industries such as software engineering, ideally, engineering is truly engineering. And in a lot of places outside of the Canadian atmosphere, education is quite similar. So usually a lot of North American companies have usually been hiring within those constraints. But now that we're seeing people be more adjusted to the global remote workforce idea, a lot of companies are starting to hire from outside their national boundaries, which is actually fascinating. Benefits of this for Canadian companies include saving a bundle on your average workforce and labor expenses. Now, what we're seeing a great deal of is hiring throughout the Latin Americas for even sales, marketing, and so forth, as we have a great alignment in terms of our education, our communication, and our time zones. So always a pretty interesting option down the road if you are considering to hire outside of the boundaries within your local area. Current market and new strategy. It's great. Canadian teams are starting to diversify a fair amount more. We're starting to open the doors to new ideas, new concepts. I've been seeing a lot of organizations lately that are really fascinating with a team of 10, but 8 are from different nationalities, all sharing stories of their holidays, their influences, their backgrounds, their family traditions. It's actually creating what's new as the remote workforce culture. We used to sit around and play ping pong, have a beer on Friday, share stories, but we're all pretty similar from where we're from usually. And so this is creating an interesting situation where we are going more global in terms of our culture than we expected pretty quickly, but it is enhancing a lot of a new culture that isn't just about being in an office place. So pretty fascinating. Canadian companies are tending to move outside their comfort zones to make these hires as the employment market does start to strengthen again, which is nice. And I guess the main important factor for any decision you're making in ever hiring outside of your comfort zone is alignment in terms of the communication, like I was mentioning, as well as skill alignment in terms of their technical abilities to match the description of what you're hiring for. Next slide, please. So the three factors that we kind of always push on how to build a remote workforce is when you're sitting down with leadership, your hiring managers, anyone you're working with, you want to start with building a strategic org chart design. And that is basically looking at where we are right now, where are we going, and how are we going to get there. Now, there are a couple of main components to this, which is who's going to be in the leadership position, how does that leadership feel about remote hiring, and furthermore, do they have a succession plan in place for the people they're hiring? With the idea of hiring more people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different nationalities, there is a different succession planning strategy for every individual for sure. Not everyone comes from the same place, not everyone has the same work ethic, not everyone has the same, I guess, overall responsibilities as well. So that would be a huge factor when you're looking at hiring somebody from a different place. Now, thirdly, is the budget range and flex hiring. Flex hiring, we're seeing a lot where people are implementing leadership hires that are local, that align with the values and traditions of the company. And then furthermore, those leaders are hiring from more remote areas to support them. Second phase of this operation is growth planning. So once you find your target market, which we have found lately for a lot of companies is Latin America's, getting your proper marketing aligning with their marketplace. You'd be surprised by how marketing for certain industries in certain areas like Houston are different than Toronto, or Manila, Philippines compared to Toronto will be different as well. The terminology we use, the way we approach people, even the conversations we had are quite different. So ensuring that you are aligned well with that overall atmosphere's marketing plan is extremely crucial towards you attracting the right people for your organization. Last aspect to what we always push on is skill and cultural alignment. Now, this is usually just during the interview process. So when you're going through and you want to have these new additions, you'd be fascinated by the conversations you get to have with people outside of your comfort zone. Now, with that being said, you do truly want to make sure the skill set is there that they possess to get your business to the level that you were trying to plan for. Furthermore, the cultural alignment is kind of a boundary sometimes, because when you're creating this new remote culture, we don't really have a foundation to base it off of. A lot of companies just ran through it pretty quickly. And so we're kind of running off the cuff of our sleeve. That would be it for that slide. And just a quick slide to give you guys an idea of why the remote first is very important is the Canadian engineering market anticipates that we'll have 75% of our roles vacant by 2025 due to the actual employment growth in software engineering. So planning for a remote workforce would be quite ideal right now. Thanks, Al. And this is just a slide, guys, to show that the last year, basically more or less, 26% of our clients have started to work to more of an international remote workforce. And those two countries that are most hit upon are Brazil and Mexico. Let's get Al. And that would be it for me. Just want to say thank you very much to George and Alex for having me today. And thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. Definitely a topical subject matter, not just for COVID, as you said, but for beyond, as people open their minds to integrating talent from elsewhere. So I know you're an expert on that subject. So if anyone who is listening today needs a little bit more advice, Joshua is definitely your man. So his email is there if you want to get in touch with him. So next we are going to move over to Star. Star is the VP of Customer Success at PartnerStack, and she's basically a celebrity because she was recently on the top 100 customer success strategist list for 2020. And Star is going to speak to the idea of adjusting virtual company events.
Thanks, Alex. What a timely conversation with Joshua and with Eric, because it ties in lovely. We all know we're incentivizing correctly and making sure everyone's getting paid out correctly. Then we're hiring all the right talent to be on the bus. But how do we ensure that everyone is engaged in the culture itself? So today we're going to be focusing on just that. So Alex, if you switch over to the next slide. So long are the days in the tech world anyway, where this would be our ideal environment. We'd all be sitting around the table, working and collaborating together. In some cases, we all have our headphones on because we don't want to be disrupted and we want to be held to make sure we're continuing to be productive. This also used to be what Starbucks used to look like as well when you would walk in. So we might be missing those days today. Or, Alex, if we switch to the next slide, we might also be missing the impromptu chats that we'd have in a kitchen, right? If depending on where you are across the world, that might be different. You might be allowed back to your workforce or not being back to the workforce, but you might be missing that social engagement. But that's okay, because as we know, Alex, if you switch to the next slide, we got Zoom. And we're over Zoomed, right? There's Zoom coffee, Zoom meet. Oh, let's do Zoom Halloween. Let's do Zoom team lunches. And so, or, conferences as we're going to them today, which used to be a networking moment where we get to interact and meet a lot of people. We're now doing those remotely too, much like today's webinar. And so the world is changing, and how we're investing in that cultures for each of our organization need to change too. And one really good example is Halloween. We just finished Halloween. Now, some individuals in your organization might love the Halloween spirit, and they might be excited going, oh, great, I get to dress up and go into the work and really enjoy everyone around them. Or they might even actually enjoy getting dressed up at home as well. But there might be a portion of your organization that really does not like that. Right? For me, as an example, although I'm more of an introvert, and for me, getting dressed up and then creeping down to my basement and sitting down in the dark in a Halloween costume really doesn't quite excite me, especially so people can look at my shoulders and above. So as a result, Zoom really doesn't work for those type of cultural events we used to have in the past. So we need to start thinking a little differently about how we go about executing. Another one that personally drives me crazy is team lunches. Who loves to watch somebody eat chicken wings in a virtual call? It just doesn't work. But we do. We're like, hey, we got new members on the team. Hey, we have all these workers across the world. Great, let's bring them in. Let's do a lunch or a breakfast. But it's not the same. One thing that does work, though, is beer. Virtual beer carts work anywhere. And I love that because that works. But that's because we have being able to kind of reinvent it and look at really what are we trying to accomplish. So Alex, if you switch to the next slide, we need to start thinking about how do we get together virtually, right? We need to invest in our culture, but how do we go about doing that? Well, one of the key things we need to take into consideration is we need to reinvent it. We need to start looking at going, what are we trying to get the outcomes of? For example, holiday season is just around the corner. We might not have those holiday parties as we used to have before, so how are we going to go about doing that? Are everyone going to get like a gift basket that's going to be delivered to them? Or are we going to start doing different types of style of holiday events? Or are we going to do, I don't know, maybe like at the 12 days of the holidays, and it could be a completely different focus where one could be giving back, and it could be almost like a bingo format where they're doing something themselves. But my point of saying this is we really need to reinvent how we're doing our activities. Everything doesn't translate well by slapping the word virtual on it. Like, we can't take a team lunch and go, we're going to virtual. We're going to slap virtual on it. We're going to eat our chicken wings all together. It doesn't work, right? We're not going to put our Halloween costumes and creep down to the basement and sit there so that we can get on Zoom calls. But we could use tools like Slack is a very common tool used today. We could have everyone change their name to be something that's spooky. Like, for example, my name is Star, and so changing it to be Scar is pretty easy. I just swap out the T for C, and now I'm participating. But you're still having these small, little, tiny, incremental changes that's still feeding into the overall organizational culture. So with this, I'll switch to my last slide here. I deploy you to reinvent the events. Think about really what you're trying to drive. Don't just take the event as it is today and then go, well, how do I do it virtually? Think about what are you trying to do, right? If you're trying to continue to invest it, how do you now do it virtually? For example, do we now start switching to doing bake-offs online, do virtual lessons or teaching of the holiday spirit coming? Well, let's do cookies. Hey, you want to know how to make this very fancy dessert? Join me on Zoom at 7 o'clock to learn about this. And that could be part of your organizational culture. You can find other ways of pulling people in instead of saying, hey, we're going to do game night at 5 o'clock. Let's join us. That can work, but just think about the intent. What are you trying to get out of it? So have fun reinventing the events. Think about what the holiday season might look like for you. I'm a fellow Newfoundlander and I can't get on the island for Christmas, so I'll be reinventing what the Christmas spirit will look like for us. Christmas tree decorating might be a little boring as I put them on Zoom and as I continue to put all the things on the tree, but hopefully we can share the stories of what each of the little things that's going on the tree is all about. If you want to brainstorm ideas, feel free to reach out to me. Alex?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Star. I think you're so right. I've been invited to a huge number of virtual events that in no means have any business being virtual, and yet, they go ahead. So I think that was a great start to the conversation and has hopefully, triggered a couple of ideas in our listeners' heads. So thank you very much to all three of you. I realize that in my excitement of getting this afternoon going, I didn't actually introduce myself. So I'm Alexandra Zabo, and I work at George Leggett Professional Corporation, downtown Toronto, as an employment and labor lawyer. If you want to get in touch with any of our presenters today, all three of them have given the A-OK to list their details here. So please do reach out to them directly if you have any kind of follow-up questions. That's, the main purpose of the World of Work, is to, even in our virtual days, get some ideas and content flowing between not just our presenters, but hopefully a mix of all. So if you enjoyed what we did today and want to get involved, please do get in touch with us. You can go to worldofwork.ca and fill out the contact form there. So thanks very much, everyone. If you're in Toronto, enjoy the beautiful, beautiful sunny weather. If you're elsewhere, hopefully the sun is shining there as well. And thanks so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.